So here are a few interesting clips from my most recent episode from my All in Trauma podcast. This is with Caroline Strawson, a coach and a therapist and an expert in working with narcissistic trauma. We'll be talking about attunement, authenticity, talking about working from self, culture. Our leaders also be talking about the interesting relationship between covert and overt narcissism. Do you know the difference? Have a look at this.
I have to show you on that. Now, I know we're on a podcast, so
Cool.
people can't see this, but I'm going to show you this. This is what represents my anger part. It's a Wonder Woman doll.
Oh, and it's very cool. So she's looking wonderful in a blue long robe.
She's in this blue dress. I love Wonder Woman. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the first Wonder Woman, and I absolutely, she was like an idol for me as a kid. So I love all of this. One of the things for me when I was healing from my own traumas was I had an incredibly strong anger part, and I felt really ashamed of feeling angry so much of the time. I'd kind of moved from that dissociative state. I didn't realize actually then going into anger was a sign of my healing as I was moving through my nervous system. Right. I felt more shame being angry than actually being dissociated all of the time. Because again, from an external perspective, it's more of a mobilized energy that people see. You know, when you're dissociative, you're numbed out and it looks like you are okay a lot of the time to people who don't understand. So when I shifted into that anger part, I desperately wanted people to understand what I'd been through, what it was like to have been married to a covert narcissist, you know, and the more I was trying to get people to understand, probably the more crazy I sounded in some respects. And then their lack of understanding and lack of validation, the angrier I would get. And it was only when I started to do parts work that I could really start to get to know my anger part. But actually my anger part was there in those moments when I felt unseen, unheard, no one believed me. So it was almost like my Wonder Woman was turning to me going, Caroline, don't worry. I know you think nobody's listening. I know you think no one's hearing you, but I do. And I'm going to shout and get angry and try and get everybody else to understand for you so that let's hope someone will, so you can feel better about yourself. And in that moment, I thought, wow, how amazing are we as human beings that we have these parts that can show up. So when I think now, and don't get me wrong, I still do get angry, I still blend with that part sometimes, but I feel incredible compassion to that part now because I know there's an inner child in there hurting at that particular point. And that anger part, Wonder Woman for me, is kind of like my warrior, my inner guardian, trying to protect me from feeling something else. And when I feel like no, there's no voice or anyone's listening, that part shows up for me and it gets angry. Listen, you know, listen to what Caroline is saying. If you're not listening, I'm going to shout louder. And that for me is really powerful when you can start to understand. And actually now I have a great conversation with Wonder Woman, and it's rare that she shows up. She still does show up sometimes, but I don't feel that shaming of myself when it does. I just know there's something going on in me. I'm not looking to others to fix it. I know that it's just something for me, younger part of me needs some reassurance at that stage.
Such a lovely relationship once you have a chance to understand and to see those different parts, why they're there, what they're doing. And like most relationships, they need work, don't they? They have to be nurtured, and each, like all of us, we need to be seen before we can be in a relationship, and others need to be seen by us. And what's lovely there is you've kind of created an ally in Wonder Woman because she's being seen in you, but she's not being pathologized. That's my bad side. That's my angry side. That's my destructive side. That's the power in me here.
There's no bad parts. There are only parts that are there to try and protect you from feeling something. Their intention is always good. Yes, their impact may be destructive, but at the core of all of that, and like you say, it's not about the pathologizing of everything. Even how I think about narcissism, and I know, you know, I don't necessarily agree with the medicalization of narcissistic personality disorder. How I see a narcissist is an individual with a collection of protector parts, because they also have a core wound. So they have this collection of protector parts that are abusive. And then we can term those collection of abusive parts, an umbrella term, a narcissist, because in the DSM, they list 9 traits for a narcissist. And actually, when I teach this, I have over 35 traits of a narcissist that in different elements of their life on an everyday basis would then culminate into being abused. You know, you can have an anger part, a narcissist can have an anger part, but there's a whole other parameter that comes with that with a narcissist. So, you know, it's about that understanding around, you know, our human behavior. So it's not necessarily pathologizing everything. It's really understanding, well, why are they there? And again, you know, from a DSM perspective, it's something that, you know, when I read through the DSM, which I don't often do, I hasten to add, I don't sit there and, oh, Sunday afternoon, I'm going to sit there with a cup of tea and read the DSM.
Yeah.
I kind of look through it and I think, I see it as parts. For me, it's like all of these parts that are then listed as the symptoms, and then we're labeling the parts as, you know, bipolar disorder or whatever it is. So narcissistic personality disorder. And again, when I teach all of this, we go through actually all the 10 personality disorders from the DSM. And then I get all of my students to go, okay, let's look at this through a trauma-informed lens now. What could this be caused by? What could that be caused by? And it all comes back to trauma all the time. Then to heal, narcissists won't change. So if they won't change, if we want to change how we feel, that has to come from us. Now, I know my ex-husband has never changed. He's still exactly the same as he was then as he is now. My reaction to him is completely different now. When we first split up, and, you know, when you go through a divorce, as many probably listeners possibly have, you know, you think things, you know, there's going to be a shakedown. It's still a traumatic experience, but, you know, it kind of levels out. It doesn't with a narcissist. It can actually get far, far worse, especially when you have children as well. And for me, however he was behaving, because I'd got this trauma bond, so this literally chemical addiction to the feelings of being in that abusive relationship, I was addicted to feeling like that, even though I knew I should not, you know, message and that. I couldn't help myself. My body was going, no, I need to feel like this. And it was like this addiction. So everything then that he would say to me, Mark, I would interpret that as, I'm not good enough, I'm worthless. That would cause an immense activation in my body, a trigger. But that didn't come from just my ex-husband. It came from old childhood wounds as well. You know, my ex-husband was just really shining a great big spotlight on my wounds that were already there. So now, knowing that my ex hasn't changed, my reaction to my husband now, ex-husband, is not one of, oh, I'm not good enough. And then that sets me in that spiral of activation and my parts coming up then to try and protect me. I see with compassion exactly why he is who he is. That absolutely does not excuse his behavior and how he was with me. But I can now see through a very clear trauma-informed lens that his behavior was not because of me. It was not as a reflection of me. It just was to me. And that power then to not just know it cognitively, because as I started to heal, I did know that, but feel it somatically in the body, so I don't now react. You know, my nervous system is still very calm. It's in ventral vagal all of the time. I'm not reacting to perception of danger that he's making me feel a certain way. And that's in a lot of work I do. We find out, what is your perception of danger when you're around a narcissist? Because actually, if it's just words, what are those words triggering in you? What is your perception of that? And that often then goes back again to those attachment, those childhood wounds that we are holding.
Thank you for sharing that, and, you know, your own experience within that and the way within which you kind of got out of his spotlight, or sometimes, you know, the projections of some of his own complexity and trauma onto you, which also then danced with your own developmental trauma, if you like, and the two between them then can become a trauma bond, a codependency, a kind of have an addictive quality about it, which can be so powerful and seductive and beautiful, like most addictions, despite having a very harmful consequences. And I was interested in this idea, because it's anything diagnostic suddenly becomes a little bit left-brained, doesn't it? And we can get into a sense of trying to categorize something that's far too pluralistic and rich and varied to be able to do that. But the way you're putting it there, perhaps within the description, what you were doing there of your journey in relation to your ex-husbands, is that you got to a point where you were looking at things like somatic markers, experiences in your body, feelings, and authenticity in who and how you are, to be able to meet those parts and then to be able to do the work that you've done that's been so transformative and beautiful. But what I'm hearing or picking up is that the narcissist is somebody who's got this level of complexity and all this perhaps trauma within their childhood, might not get to the point where they develop some kind of trust to take that insight, to be able to look at their own failings, vulnerability, pain, somatic kind of presentations, these parts. So you remain within the same addictive patterns of projecting your ills onto somebody else and live in this kind of within a falsity rather than an authenticity that you found in your journey.
Absolutely. And I think that's if you think about that codependency narcissist magnet, so to speak, again, codependency for me is a collection of parts that show up for an individual that we can classify then as a codependent. Things like, certainly for me growing up, it was people pleasing, perfectionism, high achieving. These were all very much codependent traits that I had, but they were protector parts of that, again, that we can umbrella term then codependency. I think how I see a narcissist is they are deeply wounded. Again, we know from a research perspective at the moment that there isn't a narcissist gene, so to speak. Again, it's perception of parental behavior when they are a child. And again, we don't actually, again, from a clinical research perspective, know why does actually someone then become a narcissist? Because in theory, you can have two parents, two children, one could become a narcissist, one could become a codependent. We don't actually know fully why that happens. We just know it does at this point. And from a narcissist perspective, and this is how I see it, that those deep wounds that a narcissist will have, because they have interpreted, again, just like I did as a codependent, parental behavior, events in their childhood, which has then gone on to produce their protector parts. And when we talk about the true self, so to speak, the narcissist protector parts almost become their true self. You can never get beyond their protector parts to get to work on that inner child wound. Sadly.
Fear and safety is so important and intertwined into all of this, aren't they? And there's the fear of being murdered within 7 days after you leave. And of course, that fear is also, isn't it, on the back of the other person's fear of being left alone.
Yes.
Of being abandoned, of and the greatest fear we have, even though we may not be consciously aware of it, even from the moment of birth, is that we need to be loved and looked after to survive. And that never stops throughout our life. We need to feel that. And the situation you're describing there, if I stay in this relationship with a narcissist, I'll get breadcrumbs of some kind of relationship, something I could call love, which I need, because without the fantasy is that there's nothing, without nothing I perish.
Right.
Yeah, I'm also losing the love of my loved ones that can see from outside that this isn't a loving relationship. So you kind of get caught between this horrible, fearful place of abandonment and aloneness, which is our greatest heartfelt fear, isn't it? And I think of that in terms of the narcissist as well, as I know you're very mindful of and very aware of their parts, rather than that they've come to this earth to be monsters and to terrorize people. I know you don't ever subscribe to that at all, but there's this kind of, just as get that relationship between attachment and authenticity. And if I can be in attachment, I can survive. But if I'm authentic, then my attachment figures that may be traumatized themselves and full of stress and they see me express myself growing up, my pain, my fear, my hunger, my need for a cuddle, my want for security, my guilt, my shame, all those things. If my attachment figures cannot hold that and will punish me for that, I very quickly learn that I cannot be authentic in myself, in my body. I have to develop this grandiosity, this way of coping, this kind of, maybe this idealized idea of who I am, which probably does fit with this DSM ideas, you know, preoccupation with fantasies of success and power and all these kind of things, and create this narrative, but it's so far away from authenticity because I cannot face my pain. And then that, by the time I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s, this becomes how I'd be as a narcissist in relationships. You cannot get near me because I've learned not to exist.
Absolutely. It's not good enough to be you. It's unsafe to be you. You'll be judged. You might, you know, as a kid, you might have been hit for being you. You might have been silenced for being you. You might have been shut in a room. You might just have been unloved for being you. A parent who's unemotional, you know, you learn that it's not safe to be you.
And I just, yeah, that's a lovely thing. And just thinking about the extent of that and how that feeds into things, whether if we've got that level of complexity growing up with stressed, traumatized, unavailable, neglectful or abusive parents. And then, you know, we're more susceptible to that. But I just stepped back. I was thinking just before we spoke, I thought, oh, I really want to find out about this stuff. And for me, my head keeps going to other places. Recently, I was reading Wounded Leaders by Duffel. I don't know if you've seen it. British Elitism and the Entitlement Illusion. And it's a really beautiful book, Caroline, and ties in very much with what you're saying, but kind of draws back in a kind of sociological kind of way. But it says that all of our leaders that we have ever kind of had, certainly in our country, we're in the UK right now, but we could think of our cousins overseas, and it's not too difficult to think of certain leaders that might fit into this this framework. But all of our leaders seem to come from this place where their early attachments have been replaced by caregivers, and that's often in the elite schooling systems, which we understand and know are full of all sorts of abuse and, if not abuse, abandonment and neglect.
Yeah.
So our leaders are kind of going into this and trained into narcissistic wounds of having to be the best, the greatest, the wonderful, and, you know, with all those things of Narcissus, and to be able to see themselves and their growth and development is central to their world, which is perhaps the only world. And then these become the leaders that then infiltrate and the rest of society with these kind of values that we look up to. So it's just fantastic how we have this kind of, in our cultural fetishism towards egocentrism, narcissism, and this kind of self-indulgence from the top down, and we lost the sense of a wider collective understanding of love and empathy.
I know, I agree. And I think their protector parts in some respects that they then present as are very good for going into those leadership roles, because, you know, it supersedes maybe other people who have other wounds, other parts then that are showing up that maybe don't move towards those. I put a post actually on Facebook the other day, how many leaders do you think are narcissists? And it was just really interesting reading the responses from all of them to some of them to, it was just again just really interesting seeing all of that, because, you know, to have that sense of drive to really get to some of these highest levels, you're going to be dealing with a lot of other people who have a lot of wounds as well. And really, you have to be a certain way to navigate your way through all of that. And, you know, narcissists can be very, very good at navigating their way through all of that because they are so driven. And almost the more they get activated, the more they step into that role of grandiosity and entitlement and leadership in some respects like that, which then other people see as this strong leader, so to speak. And it's only sometimes, again, where you can take a step back that you can see all of these different complexities and dynamics of an individual who's in that role, that they are driven by their own need not to feel something else, and that then can become a leader, you know, in the world as such as well. And I think they're the types of narcissists that most people think are narcissists, those ones that are driven. I always think the most dangerous types of narcissists are what we call covert narcissists, you know, the ones who act like a victim in all of that to get a need met, so to speak. So, you know, they're almost the ones that are harder to spot. You know, a community narcissist who is covert as well, you know, who is maybe in religious sectors, who maybe is that person who's, you know, in the charity sector, and that, you know, they're doing it for their own gain and getting the adoration, but then behind closed doors in their relationships, they're very abusive.
Well, you're doing beautiful work, Caroline, really beautiful work. And I think, you know, for me, in my experience, not I haven't got the experience you have in working with narcissism, but the experience I've working with other issues and trauma, it's that you bring, that love, that not just acceptance, because it's not even like you're having to have the power to give permission, but this the vulnerability that comes forward, and the way you can hold that lovingly and carefully and beautifully is where the healing lies. And often our vulnerability is our portal, isn't it, to the higher spiritual self and our higher healing. And I just loving everything you said today. You know, I know we're coming towards the end, but loving everything you said. And you bring yourself, you turn up, you know, I can see that you turn up for your people, and you turn up in your body, and you're not turning up off a protocol or off a map of something. You turn up in a relationship, which is something we're all so fearful of losing. And I just love you, and I love your beautiful work you're doing, and all the people you're touching along the way, the professionals and the people that are also doing the work. And we're often the same thing. I say professionals and clients, we're the same thing, aren't we? But and the way you've explained it today has just really been rich for me. I'm going to be thinking about this a lot. We may have to do a follow-up on this at some point, if you're up for that, Caroline.
Absolutely, yeah. No, yeah, it's you know, we could sit here all day and talk about it, couldn't we?
We will. And your beautiful podcast and your book as well. I'll put links below as well, so people can get to that. But you remind me the title of your book, because it's something I'm going to read for sure.
Divorce became my superpower.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah, because I genuinely think it did. It was a catalyst for me to go in and really work on my own inner wounds, you know. So yeah, I feel it was part of my journey. And whilst at the time, obviously, it felt very traumatic, but actually it allowed me to stop. It allowed me to go within, and it allowed me to really look at myself, which was very painful, I have to say, but so rich and worth it in the long run.